Okay, next up, the M14 rifle. Now, where we are time in history is middle of the 1950s, middle of the Cold War. We had World War II and we got in the mindset. We're looking for a different style weapon. Now the M1 Garand was a success, so much so that the Belgians developed the FN-49 to compete with it. That was considered cutting edge at the end of the 40s. Like I said, using the full power rifle cartridges makes a semi-automatic design clunky, cumbersome, and large. And a lot of them were frail, like the ones the Germans tried. They were complicated devices and they broke down. It was difficult. The Russians had a version that really didn't work well. So, and everybody wanted to simplify it. Okay, now like I said, the Garand was a great weapon, but we're looking to simplify, make it cheaper to produce, and to more modernize it and get control. So again, what had happened? With the change in technology and development of new things, they were able to make a cartridge, which ended up being the 7.62 by 51 millimeter. What it was is, now that there were new powders available in that, they designed a cartridge that could still shoot the .30 caliber bullet that the U.S. military had to have, okay, in a smaller package. Now, if you fire a 30-06 in this gun, in the 7.62 by 51, you will look at, unless you get out to 600-800 yards, this cartridge here will drop more. It doesn't have as much power as a 30-06, meaning you can build a smaller scale rifle. So I guess what they did is, there was a general in the Pentagon. He pushed for this cartridge, and he also, from plans that we took from the Germans, developed a 40 millimeter grenade launcher. And he was in the Pentagon and he pushed these projects and he kind of shoved them down everybody's throat. Now, what happens again? Well, we go back to the M1 Garand. Fabrique Nationale did the FN-49. And it was kind of on par with the Garand. It was an equal. It works well. I've had one. They function properly in that. But they were refining it to the FN FAL. And again, this is where it's all tied in. They realized you had to have a smaller cartridge, not as powerful as like the 30-06 or the 8 millimeter and that. And they were developing some 270, 280 cartridge, kind of a little bit of a, call it a mid-range cartridge. Something a little bit less powerful that would be able to fit in to that FN beautifully, okay? Well, when NATO was formed and all this other stuff, this general said, we are going to design a weapon to use that cartridge, and he shoved it down NATO's throat. What this did is it pushed the FN FAL, which is a great gun. It's a great shooting gun. It's a very classy gun. Actually, it handles a little bit better than this one. But it pushed it to the end of the engineering limits. A rifle and design barely could handle it, okay? And so what did we do? We went, looked at the two guns we just looked at, the Garand and the M1 carbine. And we kind of come up with a mixture of both. This rifle used a new cartridge, a little bit smaller, okay, less violent reaction. They're using the short stroke piston in this, like on the M1 carbine. They have the same familiar op handle. The bolt is very similar to the Garand, except it has a roller bearing on the end other than just that metal tab going in there. Sights are similar to the M1 Garand. Got your bayonet lugs, similar sights. So if you know how to sight and shoot an M1 Garand, an M1 carbine, an M14, the sights are the same, okay? detachable 20-round magazine. But the unusual thing is you see up here at the top of the receiver, they used to issue you this gun, had a magazine in it, and they gave you 10 rounds of ammo on stripper clips in these nylon canvas ammo pouches, and you loaded the gun when you were empty. You put a stripper clip and stripped down 20 rounds into the magazine. Now, why they kind of come up with that, I don't know, because also this magazine rocks in. You got to rock it in. It doesn't just go straight up and down. So maybe that's why they come up with it. But the controls are similar with the Garand. The safety, the trigger mechanism, everything's kind of mishmashed together to develop this gun. This is the rifle that I used in the service. It's a great gun. I love it. There's nothing wrong with it, okay? The thing about it, though, is it was developed well before adopted. So any strange problems or bugs in the rifle was worked out before it ever got issued. Okay, but the concept also was that this was going to be the one-size-fits-all gun. This is going to replace the M1 Garand. This is going to replace the M1 carbine, the BAR, which remember is about a 19-pound squad automatic rifle with 20-round magazine, and submachine gun. The Army was going to build one magic gun and get rid of all the rest of them, sell them to whoever, or give them away, and that was it. This gun was going to fulfill all the tasks needed. Well, that kind of didn't work out, you know. I mean, they found that when we started to get into the Vietnam War, and this was a standard issue weapon the Marines and the Army, is in selective fire. Even though it's semi-automatic, you can fire this gun, it's accurate. And again, this is another match rifle. I mean, this one I think has a medium-grade match barrel on it. It is accurate. But in its configuration like this, in fully automatic, when you flip the switch and let it rip, it's difficult to control. You really can't hit nothing with it. You know, you're back to BAR, holding the gun and spraying and that, and the concept kind of is lost. Where the carbine, even in full auto, it didn't recoil as much, and you could hit something with it, even though the cartridge was underpowered. So now we're going to start mentioning some names in the story, and this is where it gets thick. Okay? At the time, there were two people involved in all of this. One was Eugene Stoner, who was the guy that designed the Armalite rifles, the AR-10 and the AR-15. Robert McNamara, okay? I believe he was the Secretary of Defense or whatever at the time in the 60s. And when this gun was going into its trials, okay, or the Army was developing a rifle, where the controversy got in was there were several different guns in the trials. I think the FNFAL was one of them. And this is where Stoner comes in, is he had what is called the AR-10. And he had a gun that weighed almost 7 pounds. It was 6-point-something pounds. It was in the 7.62 by 51 millimeter. Had a 20-round detachable magazine. It was just like a AR-15 on steroids in that caliber. The Army rejected the AR-10. Rejected a few other guns and kind of went with this, which as you see is a compilation of what we're used to, very similar to the Garand and the carbine, all their features rolled into one. Now, this is where you get Stoner involved. Stoner and McNamara were both Army officers during World War II. And I think McNamara was a specialist in logistics. And Stoner, he was in the Air Corps or something with aircraft. And after the war, he got out and was an engineer in an aircraft company. And he experimented with using aluminum and other lightweight things to, he eventually started making guns, okay, using these materials. And he designed them in very simple, basic way. And again, this concept of World War II, like the Sten gun, you want a simple, basic gun, easy to take apart, lightweight, cheap to produce, okay? Aluminum, and that costs less than steel. These forged steel with these complicated machining in here. To make one of these receivers is no easy feat, and it's not cheap. That's why these rifles cost in excess of $1,000 today. They're not simple to produce, okay? You got to remember the mindset. Quick, fast, easy, lightweight. We're getting into detachable magazines, more firepower, more this. So this is how it's all evolving. In Stoner, I believe he was ahead of his time. His designs, his concepts, and his ideas were rather good, but like they said, when he brought them up, way ahead of its time. We did not have the manufacturing base or machinery or ways of doing it to produce the guns economically to make them work right. Okay, that's just it. See, the thing about Stoner's guns is the tolerances are all super close on them in the designs. And they are simple, and they work well. So we get into the mix, and where the political thing about this gun is at the same time, because the Italians were given M1 Garand. So that's what the Italian army was using to ally us and part of NATO. And so now they're told, well, we're going to go with the 7.62 by 51 millimeter because that's going to be the NATO round. So all the NATO countries are doing this, and where they kind of insinuated this whole army testing thing was biased and kind of crooked is the Italians took our M1 Garands, examined them, and redesigned their own gun, very similar to the M14. I think it's called the BM58. They made their own version of the M14 to their style. It's different than this gun, but along the same lines. They did it in half the time and at half the cost of what the U.S. government spent to develop this gun. Okay, which kind of shows a little bit of, you know, if some other country can do it faster, cheaper, and quicker than us and end up with something just about as good, kind of wonder about the process there. So again, and then the mindset of the Army. The Army liked this, everyone felt comfortable with this gun. It was just like the old M1 Garand and wood, metal, new and improved. It is simpler to take apart. You take it apart like the Garand, there's one pin, and you take a rod and a spring, unlock it, and then the op rod and all that comes out. Okay, it's very similar and it's simpler. It is more simplified than disassembling an M1 Garand. Okay, less parts, but still it has that little stupid pin that holds everything together. Lose that little tiny pin. See, so it's kind of a downfall to it. But these are a good weapon, fairly reliable weapon. I never really heard anything bad about them in the service other than if you get sand or get on the beach or something, the Marines complain that sand will screw them up pretty bad in the Marine environment of waiting up on the shore. But other than that, the rifle served us well. It didn't serve long, okay, because this is where the story starts getting thick. Okay, in the trials, they turned down Stoner's AR-10. Well, he come back and said, all right, I got something else. And he went the opposite way. Instead of staying with this, he come back with the AR-15, which was, again, 6-some-pound rifle. And he used a version of the 223, which became the 5.56 by 45, okay? He went and got a civilian caliber, and the reason he used that is because the thing about that caliber is it just barely made the minimum required lethality or something in order to submit this into the program, okay? So again, off-the-wall caliber. Okay, so right there and then that's out. So initially, the AR-15, which was I think part of, it was tied into the adoption of this. The AR-10 was just rejected. It was adopted by a couple countries, the Netherlands, Portugal. And he submitted, well, if you don't like this big one, try this one. And he come up with the AR-15, the gun we all know and love. And that's where things are all starting now to meld together. But Stoner's aluminum and plastic guns were rejected by the Army. They didn't like them, okay? And there's a little bit of bias into it because they were way ahead of their time. The whole concept, his whole idea of aluminum, Bakelite or nylon plastic, it's not really plastic. I'm not quite sure what the material was, but the only people who could make injection molded plastic at the time were toy companies and stuff. So that's where all these weird names, and people just didn't like it. It was too much of a radical change too soon. So the M14 was adopted regardless of the test. They said that the tests were biased. Okay, that's where the controversy gets. And now you're going to get all these different people involved in this. So now we're coming into where we're all running together. So the Army and the powers to be said, okay, we're going to adopt this gun. Everybody was happy with it. It's familiar like the M1 Garand. It's got a nice full power cartridge, you know, even though you see the trend, they're just dropping down a little from the 30-06. They're making a smaller cartridge, a little less powerful. Not greatly powerful or less powerful like the M1 carbine, but this is how you get a shoulder-fired, magazine-fed gun that you can have in selective fire. You have to have a little bit more of a mild cartridge in there. And see, the Russians already had the AK-47, and this is where we're going to run into problems as we go on into the next step of how we ended up with the M16.